Premier Burt, it's great to have you here in Jackson Hole. Welcome.
Thank you. It is great to be here in the great state of Wyoming.
Maybe we could kick off by talking about the fact that Bermuda built out an innovative regulatory regime for crypto pretty early on. Can you talk about what drove that and how that's gone?
Well, if you look back and remember all the, I guess I would say, hype in 2017, the hype was really around that blockchain is going to kill everything. Blockchain is going to take everyone's jobs. It's going to streamline, automate. And in Bermuda, our biggest business is insurance. And one of the things of which they spoke about is that insurance is going to be at risk by blockchain in the future. And so what we said, kind of, I guess, would be familiar to people in the United States. If we do not have the ability for our companies to innovate in Bermuda, they will go somewhere else and will innovate somewhere else. And so that was the approach of which we took. And so in 2017, we set up a blockchain task force about 3 months after I was elected as a leader of the country. And then we moved on in 2018. I remember it was in May, we introduced the Digital Asset Business Act, came into force in September. So for 6 years now, we have been regulating digital assets. We have had a turnover with our particular regulator, but that's where it started. It started from making sure that our companies had the ability to innovate in Bermuda. But in Bermuda, we have kind of like Wyoming, that we are small and nimble, that we get feedback from our industry, from our lawyers, and from the companies that are inside the space. And so we added regulatory clarity for derivatives, which we've seen has been successful. We added regulatory clarity for lending and staking, but then we also moved into insurance, where we have licenses for companies that are doing digital marketplaces in insurance as well, using digital assets, in addition to the fact that we have long-term insurers as well, because we recognize that people who are inside of this industry may not want to convert to fiat, but may want to access traditional things such as life insurance and other matters. And so we have the ability for companies to underwrite, to collect, I would say, premiums in Bitcoin, to keep the balance sheet with our regulator in Bitcoin, and also pay claims in Bitcoin. So we've been doing a number of things around this to make sure that we can become the home for well-regulated international financial companies.
Yeah, and something that gets a lot of attention in discussions on the crypto space is kind of tokenization of real-world assets, tokenization of equities and bonds. This is something you've already explored in Bermuda. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about what you've trialed in that area and what your thoughts are and what we might be able to do in the future.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's important because, as you know, there is a lot of hype around this space oftentimes. And, sometimes people will launch projects and say certain things. Well, in Bermuda, we try to focus on what we are actually doing. I can take on a few examples, but I guess I want to touch on the biggest one, because when we talk about the tokenization of real estate, when we talk about the tokenization of other items, I think if we look at it from a real-world assets perspective, I think that insurance is the lowest hanging fruit. There are billions, or not billions, trillions of dollars of insurance capital that exists, and the question is, how can you use digital assets to access that? Well, in Bermuda, you can do that right now. I mean, with companies, I know Nick just came off the stage, whether it's with Mounted Protocol, with other things which are licensed in Bermuda, people are able to use digital assets to go ahead and to invest in insurance markets, which is something that was always only available to large insurance and reinsurance funds. Now, between the companies that are licensed in Bermuda, which have digital asset business licenses and also insurance licenses, persons are able to use their digital asset capital to participate in these markets. When you look at the future, what this will hold is that for companies to be able to set up digital captives for their own selves and be able to go ahead and access these insurance products, which are, of course, necessary for any type of business they function in the world. But we're not just looking at it from the insurance side, even though we believe that is the biggest opportunity. And we're seeing a lot of our insurance companies in Bermuda innovating that space and accessing these new, I guess I would say, marketplaces because they are so efficient. But also, for a recent example, Bermuda Air, which was a new airline that was started in Bermuda. They launched a smart bond, a smart contract where persons could invest digital assets into Bermuda Air in real time and also get paid out through digital assets. And we're also looking at facilitating trade finance transactions through stablecoins, foreign currency exchange using segregated asset companies. These are companies that are actually licensed in Bermuda currently now that are doing this work. So it is incredible to see. And so from that aspect, it's not really around the, the retail side of what we see. That's not the main thing. It's really around institutions and how institutions are able to go ahead and launch platforms from the Bermuda using our clear regulatory regime.
Yeah, it's very interesting to hear about those kind of utility use cases of crypto. I mean, that's a real world live example of where you've actually deployed that in Bermuda.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You've spent some time in industry before going into politics. And I wanted to ask you to talk a little bit about the lessons that you learned from that. What is it that you did? And then how have you taken those lessons into your new kind of political career?
Well, it's funny because I don't have, I guess I would say, a political background per se. My job before going into full-time politics was in tech, actually. So I was an IT project manager. My master's work was in information systems development. And so I'm more to building systems rather than dealing with matters related to government. But there are some really important takeaways that I took from that. The first is that you have to be very clear on the problem which you're trying to solve. And for anyone who's ever been into systems design and requirements analysis, which was my main line of training, that's key. Know the problem which you're trying to solve. And from the Bermuda aspect, we know that we cannot be all things to all people. And in the hype cycle of 2017, 2018, everyone was trying to come into Bermuda, say, oh, we can do this, we can do that, we can do all these type of things. And as everyone knows inside of this industry, there are people who are not forthright. There are people who are trying to exploit, and there are people who are outright trying to scam. And the joke that I used to give back in the day, that though our prison does have ocean views, I promise you it is still a prison. So we make sure that we keep our rules tight. But that's the other thing. It's like you can't boil the ocean. So you have to be very specific, knowing that you cannot be all things to all people, and focus on the problem we're trying to solve. For us, we narrowed our perspective. Rather than trying to be all things to all people and boil the ocean, we says, where is Bermuda's sweet spot? We know it is in the institutional side. We know that it is around the matters related to insurance, and how can we actually demonstrate how these technologies can really work to bring efficiencies to markets which did not exist before. Insurance is it's huge, but it is traditionally inefficient. How do we fix that? On matters related to foreign currency exchange, trade finance, all those other things, we are huge, but they are notoriously inefficient. How do we fix that? Through the significant capital flows that we have coming through Bermuda. And so from that aspect, that's how I've put the training that I had into this, make sure that we remain laser focused on what we are trying to achieve.
That makes a lot of sense. Talking then about maybe innovation and what comes next. What's your what's on your list in terms of focus areas?
Well, for anyone who's done business in Bermuda, Bermuda prides itself on being a compliant jurisdiction to international standards. Now, when you're a compliant jurisdiction to international standards and you're an international financial center like Bermuda is, the challenge that we always have is that compliance burden. And we all know we all have to deal with it where you're doing AML and KYC. And when you're looking at large companies that are actually serving retail customers, that becomes more of a burden. What we identified 2 years ago is the next stage of our evolution in making sure that we can be an even more attractive place is digital identity. But we look at digital identity not as a technology problem, but we look at it and we're trying to approach it from being a regulatory problem. And when we say that, we are now in final pre-consultation, and persons who pay attention to our wonderful regulator, the Bermuda Monetary Authority, we're releasing the consultation paper later this year on the Digital Identity Service Provider Act. And what the Digital Identity Service Provider Act will do, it will license digital identity service providers. Anyone can issue identity. We know that people do it, law firms do it, governments do it, other places do it, verified entity. And so we'll be able to set up for people to make sure that they are credentialed, knowing the types of things in which they're issuing. And once you are licensed to issue identity from the Bermuda Monetary Authority, the identities of which are going to be issued will be able to be used for AML KYC transactions. And we believe that will benefit certainly a lot of the companies that are Bermuda that are dealing mainly in the institutional space, but are also inside the retail space, whether it's exchanges or others, to make sure that we reduce that compliance burden. And we know that that is the next step. I remember listening to one of the panels yesterday, and they said, if we do everything on chain, and then we have to go off chain to do AML, KYC, and then go back on chain, it is going to be very difficult. We recognize that as an issue, and rather than approaching it from technology side, we do it in the space where we're always trying to have our strength in Bermuda, and that is approaching it from making sure we have clear regulation that will enable companies to come into our space and be able to go ahead and to issue those credentials that will be able to be used for AML, KYC from the Bermuda perspective.
Yeah. Zooming out a bit.
You like that? No problem.
I'm conscious we've probably got time for one more question. Let's zoom out a bit. What would you like the audience to take away about Bermuda, about your vision for Bermuda?
Well, I've been doing this job for 7 years now. And I mean, it's been an incredible journey. And what I would say is from the perspective of where Bermuda fits, as I said, Bermuda has always been at the intersection of developments in international finance, particularly in insurance. And when you look at what we've been able to achieve just for our innovative spirit, we talk about, yesterday there was panels talking about how Wyoming people, had to be hardy and all the rest. We are on an island that is 700 miles away from its closest landmass with no sources of fresh water. So innovation literally is inside of our DNA. We had to innovate in order to survive over these years. And Bermuda is a place for innovation. So with all of the asset allocators that are here, with all of the layer ones that are here, layer twos and others, it is a question of think about Bermuda as a place where you can experiment in a regulated space. You can say, approach our regulator and say, this is something that I am looking to do. Is this something that I can do? We'll give you one or two answers, yes or no. But by often ways, we have regulatory clarity. And what we've seen is so many companies that have come into our space wowed because we don't, run around and do these big fancy marketing blitzes and all the rest. But the fact is, I can say without fear of contradiction that the digital asset regulation and the actual regulator, because we've had no turnover in our digital asset regulator since we started this in 2018. The person who wrote our Digital Asset Business Act is now the CEO of the Bermuda Monetary Authority, that we are the best digital assets regulator in the planet. And if you want to try something new, go ahead, give us a shot, and we'd love to have you, we'd love to have you as part of our ecosystem.
I'm afraid we've had time. Thank you for being here.